YouTube at Porchcast Pottstown. We're also sending data to Facebook at Matt Green at Glocker Real Estate. Those things are streaming now. It looks like we're.
I'm singing live.
No, I don't think that counts, to be honest with you. But who knows? I guess some bands are more stringent with what they would do in order to protect their copyrights.
That particular day, we could have just caught Facebook on a.
It was right as they were updating their artificial intelligence in order to pick up on copywritten music. So it was bad timing the day you played Led Zeppelin's Black Dog.
Oh, it was Zeppelin also.
It was.
Ah. All
it
right.
was.
We got to fix these mic stands.
Yeah, well, we have some work to do. And I probably should have worked on that a little bit during our break, but I just didn't. It didn't happen.
The break is a break. Right?
Yeah. A break is a break. People are starting to tune in. Let us know that you're here, please. I can monitor the stream.
All right, I will monitor. I'll try to hop over to YouTube also and monitor a little bit over there. Thanks for sitting out in the cold, Matt. I'm roasting over here on top of this radiator.
I feel fine. I have my layers. I'm layered up, and I'm ready to start flapping my gums. I appreciate the fact that you took that time to put up the audience rating, rated R.
Sorry.
I'm going to try to stay away from the rated R language, but some of the themes, Jennifer Ann, thanks for tuning in. I've got your OG orange hat on today.
Nice
I'm going
warm.
OG.
One of these days I will cover the this side of my window so people don't have to see my kitchen. But there's my beautiful kitchen.
You have a beautiful kitchen.
Cabinets made locally by Wellsford Cabinetry by local folks. In Stowe. They're located in Stowe.
Yeah. I thought we were going to be careful.
Oh, sorry. I just was giving a shout out because my
cabinets
cabinets
of Wells Cabinetry do not
local.
necessarily the thoughts and opinion of Amy Wolf and Matt Green do not necessarily reflect those of
any business we might mention.
Any business
we might offhandedly
that we might mention or talk about. Today we're not going to be talking about business at all.
Nope.
I do want to give a little bit of a disclaimer. My opinions do not necessarily reflect those of Glocker Realty and Insurance. At Glocker Realty Insurance, we have a wide variety, a diaspora, so to speak, of political views and social opinions. My commentary does not necessarily reflect on anyone else at Glocker Realty and Insurance besides me.
I would say the same for my employer.
Right.
Yes.
And we're going to talk about some of that stuff today, but I want to make sure that we're crystal clear on that front. I do have a personal page. Anybody that really follows the show and knows me knows that my personal page is Rufus Jefferson. I am also a man about town, so to speak. I can be found around town on the regular.
I can be found around town, too, much more regularly when we're not in a pandemic.
Right.
I'm looking forward to that again.
We are going to talk about some things that have happened in our nation. Amy and I have spent a lot of time over the course of time that we've been doing Porchcast, which is going to be coming up on a year.
Dude,
can you believe that?
No, I cannot.
We're closer to a year than we're further away from it.
We're
if that
really
makes
close.
sense.
It was like March 18th
16th,
or something like that.
Something
right?
like that. and we're sitting here at January 12th.
I know, crazy.
So we're coming up on the 1-year anniversary of Porchcast.
Wow.
Our initial concept, for those that don't know, was to bring attention to the positive things that were going on in and around Pottstown. We are a Pottstown-centric show.
Yes, we are.
We wanted to talk about business development, real estate, people in our
really
neighborhood and our
concept
community.
Before we started doing it.
Right.
And then once we started doing Porchcast, it was we had a lot of resources that we were sharing. There was so much information coming out.
There was so much.
In that latter part of March, early part of April, really, and through the spring.
Yes.
There was information on grants and loans and unemployment and just so much direction, school lunches,
Where
was
to
just,
pick up
you had
pages.
You had that notebook,
I found the first notebook, and
that should go in like the American Broadcasting Museum.
I'm gonna save it.
Yeah, for sure.
And,
I've got mine. Mine is not nearly as copious as yours is, but
I wrote big a lot of times so I could hold it up and read it while I was talking, but there is a lot of information. Long story short, Amy and I had multiple discussions after we started the show and the pandemic started, and then we got into the George Floyd murder and some of these other social issues that began to bubble up because we were all in the pressure cooker of the pandemic. And I think after much discussion, hours, you and I both decided that we were not Pollyanna people. As much as
I'm
we want to
definitely
be
more than you are.
as much as we wanted to be positive, and I think we've achieved that overall positively, we are not Pollyanna.
No.
And by not addressing major social and political issues on this show, we would be doing both ourselves and the wider community a disservice by not speaking about those things.
Right. My tendency is to be non-confrontational, and I don't want to upset anyone, and I don't want to not be friends, and so I tend to, I don't want to say brush things off, but be more forgiving.
Yeah.
Which I still think is a good trait. That's just it's just innately who I am. But I think that I would like to do not a better job of, but I would like to. When I say confront people, I don't want to say confront like in a combative way, but to say I don't understand the things that you're saying.
It's not
or
necessarily,
I don't understand where you're coming from. I don't understand your viewpoint.
Right.
Can you please explain it to me? Because what you're saying sounds offensive to me.
To me, right.
Can you please explain where you're coming from so I can try to understand?
Right.
Right.
And I think that's overall, when we're talking rhetorical, in a rhetorical sense, I think that's the way you want to be.
Right.
If you are going to have an argument with someone.
Right.
And an argument isn't always necessarily heated. In fact, if you watch good debaters debate, they are never heated.
Right.
And it is exchange of ideas.
Exchange of ideas to try to convince. The purpose of a debate is to try to present your side so that the other side understands it and can understand your viewpoint.
That's right.
Right.
And those are, in the theoretic sense or the academic sense, arguments.
Yes, sure. In the definition, the truest sense of
the
the definition.
truest
right.
We here at Porchcast are not here to argue with people in the vulgar definition of argument.
Correct.
I'm not going to do that on this platform.
Right.
There are other platforms where you can find me where we can do that if that's really what you want to do.
Right.
I'm prepared.
Yeah.
So I guess that's all part of the disclaimer. Joe Rusevich, thanks for tuning in.
That's all part of the tee up.
That's all part of the tee up.
Thank you, Bill, saying we can still use his office. Thanks, Bill.
Thanks, Bill.
Miss you, man.
Bill understands this. He's a rhetorical person, a person that understands the true purpose of rhetoric and argument and debate.
I'm sure you learn those things in law school.
You learn them in college.
Yep.
You learn, even if you've gone to college for science. Scientists make arguments.
Yeah, you still have
that
to
are
prove
based
your point.
on
You have to prove your point with facts.
Yeah, the Pythagorean theory, right? The hypothesis.
Pythagorean?
The Pythagorean
okay.
theory.
Yeah.
Right? That's part of the scientific argument.
I couldn't tell you what it is, but yes.
That's that idea
If only I had a device in front of me where I could look up a definition. It would be so handy.
It's that idea that you present an argument based on your thoughts, observations, and reflections on those to create a theory or a thesis where you argue or present your position.
Mm-hmm.
That's science is built on that as well.
Right.
I think that's what we're seeing with the pandemic, right? That's why the science changes.
Science does change. I mean, it's not absolutely static. Is that the right word for when something stays
It's
still?
not static.
It's not static.
Stasis.
Right. You learn new things, and that's why the information presented about the pandemic over the last 10 months has changed. Masks, no, yes, masks, or distancing, no distancing, yes, distancing. Like
right.
As they're learning and figuring things out, then that's why the science changes.
Science changes.
Yeah.
Arguments change.
Many years ago, the science was the Earth is flat. Guess what, folks?
They
No, it's
believe
not. I'm
that
sorry
the
you're
sun-
so dark out there. Why do you look so dark?
It's just because of the lighting changes.
I guess
and
when it's really dark, because it's 5:12 and it's dusky, so
yeah.
that means that the days are getting longer, which is nice.
Listen, a lot of the stuff today is not going to require you actually seeing us, although I know people enjoy seeing Amy's lovely face, and then also later on telling me that I have a face for radio. So we're going to prove that theory because you might not be able to see. Yeah, and the camera might run out, but we're going to keep.
We'll keep talking.
So, based along what you were saying, and I have from time to time in my life experienced the same things. There are times in my life that I can think back to when I should have or could have confronted somebody or said something that I thought needed to be said, but I didn't do it.
Right.
In order for the sake of going along to get along,
right.
being civil.
Right.
Maybe
you're in a business situation and
it's just might not be particularly appropriate.
Right.
Or maybe I just didn't want to be perceived as, I'm not going to use the whole word,
right.
but an uppity.
Right.
And I realize now that now is a time in my life when I have the opportunity to take those chances. Whereas maybe before I did not.
Right.
I did not have those.
Well, and there's, I think, a certain perspective that comes with age and, security in yourself and your thoughts and your ideas and confidence.
For sure.
And
for
that
sure.
You can be more, firm.
More established in my rhetoric.
Right.
My argument. So, with that being said, we've all watched the news since January 6th. And on that day, I was kind of busy. I had work to do. There was things that I was working on. I followed the news in and out. We had a show that night. And when I saw what happened at our Capitol, please spell it correctly. It's P-O-L.
That's the first lesson for everybody.
Is the name of the building. C-A-P-I-T-O-L.
Yes.
When I saw what happened at our Capitol, and I started watching those things as best I could because I had things to do, my immediate visceral reaction was one of anger, extreme anger. Anger to the point that my hands were shaking. I literally was losing some control of my fine motor skills.
Wow.
I wanted to fight. I felt sick to my stomach. My stomach was having a physiological response to my urge to fight. My stomach wanted to purge its contents so that I could go into battle.
Right. You were having like a
If you don't
you
believe-
were having a serious fight or flight reaction.
Serious.
Yeah.
And that's yes. That's exactly what was happening. And because I spent 15 years in law enforcement, 15 years.
Yeah.
I did the math on it. Had I still been in law enforcement, January 5th of this year would have been the 21st anniversary of my career in law enforcement.
Wow.
One day prior to what happened at the Capitol. When I saw what happened at the Capitol, I had this physical response.
Right. Well, I'm sure there was a trigger, really, like a PTSD
That's-
trigger. You know, I mean, I've
there's
never
that.
been in a situation like that, so it didn't
There's that.
trigger the same kind of
Yes. It's
emotional
the same thing.
memory response.
Right.
Yeah.
And because I've trained myself over 15 years with the help of the various agencies that I worked for. I'm not a fleer.
Right.
I'm a fighter.
I would definitely be in the fleer category.
And that's fine. Everybody has their role to play in this. And maybe that's another concept that we should develop through all of this.
Right.
My role has been a fighter. Now that I'm an older man, I'm out of law enforcement primarily because of mental and physical limitations that I have. I should probably depend more heavily on the pen than the sword, if that makes sense. But the sword is
Apropos of your comment to me today.
right. The sword is still there. The sword is still there. It's part of who I am. It's part of the fabric of my nature. And when I saw what happened, at one point in time, I got out of a stopwatch. And I literally timed one of the breaches on the door on that Capitol building. 30 seconds. 30 seconds. With no law enforcement response.
Okay. Can we talk about that, or is it too early yet?
Let me finish this
Finish
thought.
your thought, yeah.
I spent 4 years working for the National Park Service, which is underneath the Department of Interior.
Right.
At a national icon, much
at the
like the
Liberty Bell,
Capitol.
right?
The Liberty Bell,
Yeah.
Independence Hall, literally the birthplace of our nation.
Right. You were
Constitution
there
Center.
during 9/11, right?
Directly after. I got there in about 2004.
Okay.
And seeing that lack of response and knowing what I know about physical security, knowing what I know about the capabilities of the Capitol Police Department, I've worked with the Capitol Police. I worked with the Capitol Police. I know how they operate.
Right.
I've been involved in law enforcement operations, physical security operations with the Capitol Police.
Right.
All right? What I saw happen at the Capitol did not reflect any of those capabilities, the true capabilities of the Capitol Police Department.
Right.
None.
Right. So what was going on there?
And maybe I'm being a little bit hyperbolic, but it was shocking to my. That's the legal word.
Like something
smells. Wasn't right.
Something smells there, man.
It was shocking to my conscience.
Yes, it was. And for somebody that doesn't have any of that background or knowledge, having seen the law enforcement response to other protests, if you will,
Right.
it was shocking
Right.
to see law enforcement moving barricades aside and running in the other direction.
Yes.
Running in the other direction. Or just not being present in the numbers that they should have been present. based on the intelligence that was available. Right. Hotels were full in Washington, D.C. Hotels were full. They haven't been full in a year.
Right.
That should have been, just right, based on that alone, should have been,
yes.
should have been enough to send up a lot of red flags.
A red flag.
Yeah.
That was shocking to my conscience. I'm going to edit the post. I just realized, folks, that Steel River is still being...
When I created the event, Matt, I copied
It's me. It's me.
Oh, okay.
That's Restream doing that.
Okay, I copied the event, and I didn't know if that was what it was. So we're not at Steel River, as you can.
I'm going to take
see.
that off, and like I said, I think we covered the fact. I think we covered our disclaimer fairly well.
Yes.
What we're talking tonight does not have anything to do with Steel River Playhouse.
Yeah.
Our thoughts and opinions do not reflect Steel River Playhouse or any of their membership. I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, it's a little tricky sometimes.
I just took that down. I will make sure that is gone after the show.
Thank you.
So, yeah,
but
Amy,
speaking of which, happy birthday, Velva.
Happy birthday. So...
And her team had a big win, so she's excited. She's happy about that.
That's what I saw that was shocking. I think.
Yeah, I will be very, very curious to see what comes out of the investigation. If they can investigate that the way they investigated Benghazi, then hopefully we'll get to see some stuff. Like what happened? Where was the breakdown? What?
Well,
was it an inside job?
Some of that is starting to come out.
Right.
And it does. There's evidence at this point, at least circumstantial evidence, but an overwhelming amount of circumstantial evidence, which would lead me to believe that department was hamstrung. I think their chief that just retired or resigned has now coming out and said that he made 6 different requests prior to that day for additional resources and support and was denied.
Right. So where was the denial coming from?
The Sergeant at Arms from the Senate and the Sergeant at Arms from Congress. The Capitol Police is controlled by Congress. Now, people often get confused. When we talk about Congress, the full Congress includes both the House and the Senate.
Right.
Right?
Right.
I believe, and somebody can check me on this, I believe both the Sergeant at Arms from the Senate and the House have resigned over this or are going to resign.
Right.
So that's the first issue. And that's one that's going to be fleshed out. It's going to be fleshed out of time.
Right.
The second issue was there very clearly, in my opinion, were sympathizers to what was happening that day. And that leads me into my next point. I want to break down what happened that day from on the 6th of January, 2021. You are not going to forget that day. Mm-hmm. This is not a day that's going to slip from your memory, nor should it. What we saw that day was an insurrection.
Insurrection. We're not talking about the Star Trek movie. Insurrection. Talking about an insurrection. Talk about the definition.
Legally, an insurrection is an attempt to overthrow a government from within.
Yeah, the call is coming from inside the house, folks. That's
literally,
what's happening. The call is coming from inside.
The call is coming from inside the House because it was. We had House and Senate members who, over the past 4 years, have fomented.
That's another word, which I don't know as though I know.
Stir up.
Stir up. That's what that means? So why is that specifically used in a?
Because it has a deeper political meaning.
It's got a political connotation.
Right.
Okay.
It's common. It also revolves around using specific types of language in order to appeal to people's emotional instincts or emotional response tied up around politics and social issues.
Here's what it says.
It's a deeper
instigate or stir up an and then in parentheses, an undesirable or violent sentiment
Violent.
or course of action. Number 2,
Yes.
to bathe a part of the body with warm or medicated lotions.
So let's go with the
We're
one.
not talking about lotion medications.
Violent.
Yeah.
It was an insurrection against this country. It was the call came. I like that analogy, Amy. The call came from inside the house.
And
Literally.
the last time we had this sort of a terrorist attack against our country was not. It was from foreign.
9/11.
Was 9/11. Was from foreigners.
Think about
unless
that.
you talk about bombings.
But
I
this
guess
one,
Oklahoma City and
this one
93
goes,
were all before
this one
that.
goes
Yeah.
beyond that,
Yeah.
in my opinion, because what those people were trying to do. Let's make this as clear as possible. They were trying to interrupt a one of, if not the most sacred of our democratic institutions, our vote, our voice. It's constitutionally established.
Right.
It is the primary way in which we make decisions in a democracy. And those people
Of the people,
there
by the people, for the
were
people.
there to destroy or at least interfere with that.
Right. Right. This is not a joke. This is not like, oh, wouldn't it be fun to go to a rally and wave some flags?
And if
this was an attempt to take down the government of the United States of America.
our process.
Let's not sugarcoat what
it
the
is.
severity of what this was.
Sedition.
Sedition. That's another word.
Look
Let's
it
talk
up.
about that.
Conspiracy
Yeah.
of sedition. That's a legal term.
Yeah.
It is also part of our federal criminal code.
Mm-hmm.
It carries with it a 20-year sentence in prison.
Right.
Sedition.
Is
last-
that federal prison?
Yeah, it's a federal
It's a federal
charge.
prison. So you're going to Leavenworth or
Leavenworth.
wherever. Yeah.
There's no parole in the federal system. There's
Really?
no, well, there might be parole. There's no probation. Well,
Right.
no, there's probation. There's no parole in a federal sentence.
So you have to serve out your
What you get is what you
is
get.
what you get. There's no appealing for an early release and all of that stuff. Yeah. So here's the sedition,
this
the
is
act of
serious.
or
Go ahead.
the definition of sedition: conduct or speech inciting people to rebel against the authority of a state or monarch. Inciting conduct or speech inciting people to rebel against the authority of state or monarch. Okay, do you remember when, well, we weren't there, but Jim Morrison got arrested for inciting
a riot.
right?
A riot.
In New Haven.
He got arrested for that in Miami, Florida,
Oh, was
too.
it
He
Miami?
He
Okay.
got arrested a bunch of different
times.
places.
Right. So he got arrested for inciting
A riot.
a riot.
A disturbance of the peace.
Yes.
Not disturbing the fundamental process of government
Right. He was just whipping people into like a sexual frenzy.
and showing his cock
Exactly.
and
That's what he was
taking
doing.
smoking joints on stage.
Right.
All right?
Right.
That ain't bringing down the government, folks. It's not.
No. Right.
Breaking into the Capitol with 50,000 of your friends in order to stop the vote count.
Yeah. Sedition.
That's
Yes.
sedition.
Yes. So people often will talk about treason, and treason is a very specific definition.
It's
right?
aid and comfort to the enemy.
Right. So, and does treason have to take place during an act of war?
That is part of it. It has to take place, and you have to give aid and comfort to typically a person or an organization who your country is in war with.
Right. So treason is a word that's, I think,
Bantied
about a little
around.
bit
Because we don't-
it's loosely.
we
It's
don't
loosely,
know-
and it's very. There have not been very many people that have been charged with and convicted of treason. It's a pretty small list, I think, in the United States, right?
Yeah, it's not very long list.
Right. So that's a term that's very specific. It
a lot
doesn't
of the yes,
really
a lot
apply.
of the treason charges, a lot of them, along with the actual charges of sedition. And if you want to see what criminal conspiracy to sedition looks like, if you want to read that code, I have it posted up as my wall picture at Rufus Jefferson.
Okay.
Read that definition.
Yep.
I also put it up on my LinkedIn account, Matt Green.
Yep.
Read that. Okay, that's the law. That's the federal criminal code on that law. It specifically talks about disrupting processes of the government. It specifically talks about making illegal entry in order to disrupt those processes.
Right.
Most of the people on the history of our nation, if not all of the people who've been charged with sedition, were Confederates during the Civil War.
Right, because they were doing exactly that.
An insurrection.
Right.
Sedition.
Right.
They wanted to overthrow the United States government and establish their own government. They had their own constitution.
Right. So this is, I'm just looking at your post that you referred to, 18 U.S. Code 2384, seditious conspiracy.
Yes.
And conspiracy is another term that is very specific to the law. I learned that when I was on grand jury. The word conspiracy has a very specific legal meaning.
In this one, it's built into the code.
Right.
Whenever two or more people conspire, which means plan.
Yes. Yeah, if two or more persons in any state or territory or in any place subject to the jurisdiction of the United States conspire to overthrow, put down, or to destroy by force the government of the United States, or to levy war against them, or to oppose by force the authority thereof, or by force to prevent, hinder, or delay the execution of any law of the United States, or by force to seize, take, or possess any property of the United States contrary to the authority thereof. They shall each be fined under this title, or imprisoned not more than 20 years, or both. I'm getting a little choked up at that. Because that's like, how is that not what happened? There can't possibly
it is
be
the
any
literal definition of what happened. Can't be any
question.
Clearer. None.
And so if we remove from the conversation or from the argument, my guy, your guy, who you like, who you voted for, let's remove all of that. Let's just take that out. Let's just talk about the acts that were committed on the 6th. Let's talk about what happened on the 6th and what criminal charges apply to those actions. Forget about everything that happened over the last 4 years. Just take it out of the equation and talk about what happened on the 6th, what acts transpired, and what they can be charged with. It's clear as day.
It's clear.
Helen Keller could see it. Clear as day.
Now, let's talk about conspiracy. Conspire.
Yes.
Two or more persons, right? Two or more.
It doesn't say
two up to 10 or 5. Two or more. Infinite number of people.
Yes.
10,000, 5,000, 50,000,
right.
1 million. Let's talk about conspiracy.
Right.
Part of that conspiracy charge, folks, is giving aid in order to commit that crime.
Right. Right. And so you can not have been there and still be charged with conspiracy.
Still be charged with conspiracy.
This in my time in the county. That conspiracy is a very specific legal terminology.
Right.
And so one may not have to have been there. One maybe could have just given the order or sent the tweet to
do it. Somebody might have stood on stage in front of tens of thousands of people and said, let's have a trial by combat.
I was like, are we in Game of Thrones? What the hell is happening?
Trial
by combat, that's not even a thing. Is that a thing?
Right.
I thought it was just in Game of Thrones. Literally, I thought it was a Game of Thrones terminology.
Somebody who's involved in a conspiracy could have, for instance, rented 3 buses and filled those buses up with people that thought just like he did, and sent them down to Washington, D.C.
Right.
If some portion or some percentage of those folks got off of that bus after being inspired by the other co-conspirators.
They were inspired and conspired, for sure.
They can be found guilty of conspiracy.
Yeah.
Any other crimes that occur as a result of that conspiracy, you can also be charged with.
Yes.
Let's talk about murder.
Yes. Right. Conspiracy to murder.
A Capitol Police officer was beaten in the head with a fire extinguisher and died from his wounds that he received. And let's not mince words. He received those in battle.
Right. Right. During an insurrection.
Combat.
Right.
When I was a police officer, the highest award that you could receive as a police officer was valor in combat.
Right. Right. I hope that Capitol Police officer receives that posthumously.
Must.
Right. Right. So I think
Now,
it's important. I think it's important to know that as we're having this discussion, we are talking about crimes and we're talking about participants. We're not talking about. We haven't mentioned any political party. We haven't mentioned any candidate. Any politician.
No names.
We haven't gotten there. We haven't even talked about that. We're just talking about what happened on January 6th in very plain terms.
Very plain speech.
Right. Very plain speech.
And
right.
when we're not using plain speech, we're providing you with definitions.
Yes, and we've got a lot of comments here from folks that are saying thank you for having this conversation and explaining things that we need to understand. We're talking about terminology. We're talking about definitions. We're talking about an attack on our government.
It was an attack on our nation.
Yes.
It was an attack on the very fabric of who we are as Americans. It was an attack in order to overthrow duly elected officials of the United States.
Right.
Whether you agree that they should have been elected or whatever the case may be, as it stands now, those men and women that were inside of that Capitol building were carrying out a constitutionally established process. Anyone that broke into the Capitol in order to stop that process was literally fighting against the very fabric of who we are.
Right.
They were fighting against one of our most important, if not the most important founding document of this nation. You want to talk about rule of law? That's the rule of law.
And we could argue, too, that Congress as a whole, the House and the Senate, are more important than the presidency.
That's the voice of the people.
Right. Right. So it's it's checks and balances. It's the voice of the people. Congress is in a lot of ways more important than the president. And we don't get to pick and choose who we...
Well, we do.
Well, no, let me finish my thought.
I'm sorry.
We don't get to pick and choose the election results that we like or we don't like.
We also don't get to pick and choose the process.
No,
The
we
process
did that.
is established.
we did that. We picked it a couple hundred years ago. And,
Right,
and
our
it seemed, and it
forefathers.
worked pretty well. Okay. Do we need to have some reform?
245
Yes, arguably,
years or so.
We need to have some reform.
Absolutely.
Right.
And we can get into reform
Yeah.
and all of that
That's
stuff.
another
Our show's not
show.
long enough for that.
No.
It's not long enough.
I feel bad you're in the dark. I don't know why.
No, it's all right. I mean, I'm sure people can still
It's very dramatic.
see me moving around
It's
and
very
everything
dramatic.
else.
Thank God you've got the hat
It's
on.
a voice from the darkness, maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And a little bit of a glare.
Here's
that's
what I'm
okay.
saying too.
More important is what we're saying than what we look like.
Right. This is theory, folks. This is political discourse. It's the very fabric of who we are. Let's not forget that. I would say this. We also need to talk about some history and some symbolism of the things that happened on that day, on the 6th. I already talked about my personal history. The day before that would have been my 21st anniversary in law enforcement. I have studied science, history, criminal law, the bulk of my adult life. I've been there.
Yeah.
I've put it on.
Yeah. I've always been impressed with your knowledge of
It's
American
time and
history
grade.
and
I'm not
civics.
smarter than anybody else. It's just
But you've
time
studied
and
it.
grade.
Yeah,
I've
you've
studied
studied
it. And
I studied fashion. You studied
I studied that, a little, some other stuff. I want to talk about the history of what we saw on that day. That day was the first time since the War of 1812 that one of our federal buildings has come under terrorist attack.
siege. It was under siege.
Under siege in order to overthrow the government. I'm not talking about the Pentagon. Somebody's going to say, well, the Pentagon got hit at 9/11. That was from an outside terrorist force.
And I would also say there's a difference between being under siege and being bombed. I mean, under siege is like it's trying to be taken over,
Right.
as opposed to just being destroyed.
That's correct.
Right? Both are horrible and
From
awful.
forces inside of our nation. During the War of 1812, the English army burned the White House, burned Washington, D.C. It was the first time that we've had any kind of breach like that on the Capitol building since the War of 1812.
Right, and that was by a foreign entity.
Foreign
by the way.
entity.
Not by so-called patriots.
Let's talk about Confederacy.
Yes. Yeah, you talked about that as one of your definitions you wanted to.
It's a
give.
word.
Mm-hmm.
A Confederate is a Confederate. A synonym to Confederate would also be conspirator, co-conspirator.
Okay.
Co-conspirator and Confederate would be synonyms on some level.
I did not know
It's
that.
someone who's part of the movement.
Right.
Someone who's sympathetic to that cause.
Got it.
The Confederates.
Okay. So if you're waving
It's-
the Confederate flag,
It is a amalgamation of people who hold similar and shared beliefs. A confederacy.
right.
Because if you think about one of the arguments of the Civil War, this was a battle or a war for states' rights. Those southern states became a confederacy together in order to cause an insurrection and sedition against the United States of America.
Right.
Those Confederates were never able, ever, to fly their battle flag on the Capitol of the United States.
Right.
Go
They had-
back and look at
They
the
had
pictures.
their own capital, right?
They had their own capital. It was Richmond, Virginia.
Right.
Go back and look at the pictures from January 6, 2021. The Confederate flag was flown inside the rotunda of the Capitol
Yeah, so
building
that-
during an insurrection, during a battle against this nation.
That was pretty. That was kind of the clincher for me. With those photos of the Confederate flag inside of the Capitol building, that was pretty rough to see. It was really rough to see.
The first Confederates. These people are neo, which means new Confederates. The Confederates were never able to fly their battle flag on the Capitol. On January 6, 2021, the Confederate battle flag was flown inside of the Capitol of the United States.
Right. Let that sink
I'm
in.
going to
folks.
take a breath.
Yeah. Let that sink in, because that is, like I said, if you think this is just a riot or a people, it's the symbol of
I
that
want to use the
flag.
terms. We broke down the terms.
Yeah.
It wasn't a riot. It was an insurrection. The people that took part of that are insurrectionists.
And so I would say to any sympathizers,
Yes,
I
there's
don't have any
information
more in my
coming out
newsfeed.
that they
I've
had
unfollowed
maps.
and unfriended most of them, but there are I do come across them on other people's feeds. You need to forget about whether you think it was warranted or you think that there was voter fraud.
We
or
haven't-
there was. You got to put that aside.
We haven't even
We
talked
haven't even
about
talked
that.
You have to put that aside because even if you think that there was voter fraud, okay, in 2016 there were a lot of people that thought that Russia interfered
Hello.
with the election, and so we let that play out. We let the FBI and Comey do their investigation. There was 2 years worth of investigation, or however it was. We were
Right.
all pretty convinced that Russia interfered with it, and got to the results that we had, and there wasn't enough to go on. So it was okay. We'll have to accept that, right? We'll have to accept that. What did we do? We put on a bunch of pink pussy hats, and 1 million women marched on D.C.
For what?
Because
Let's talk about that.
right?
Let's talk about the pink pussy hats. Let's even talk about Black Lives Matter. Those people were marching and protesting in order to gain what they believed was their full right as Americans.
Right.
If you can't see that difference,
In a peaceful way, making themselves known and heard in a mass of people,
let's
right?
let's even include the damage that was done to some of these federal buildings and everything during not the Women's March,
Right.
but BLM
Right, during the
marches
spring,
or
yeah.
the protests that happened after George Floyd,
Right.
the different protests that happened around different state capitals. Let's talk about the two different things. Those two different the main designation between those two types of protest. One of those protests or types of protests was people trying to gain their full right as Americans to have the Constitution equally applied to them and their situation as Americans
Right.
underneath the U.S. Constitution. The other folks, the insurrectionists, the seditionists, were stopping those rights from being exercised for millions of people, or attempting to stop those rights.
Right.
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
if
you
you
cannot
can't,
compare it.
if
It
you
is a
cannot,
completely different apples and oranges.
if you can't see the difference in that argument, in that position, in that rhetoric,
Yeah. You gotta
I'm
dig a
sorry.
little further.
You are you are
conspiracy.
by literal
Conspirator.
definition a Confederate of insurrection.
Right. Right. Yeah. So this is not the time for what about? Well, what about? Well, what about BLM? Well, what
There's
about?
no
It's a
whataboutism.
completely different. Completely
Let's
different
talk about if we do want to go there for a little bit, let's talk about some of the right-wing protests that we've seen. Let's talk about the Bundy clan up there in
Oh.
Washington and Oregon.
Yeah. That was a few
Didn't
years
they
ago.
occupy a federal building? Yes.
Yeah.
They took over the Malheur Wildlife Refuge.
Right. Okay.
Because of
insurrection.
grazing
Insurrection.
rights.
Insurrection. Federal
Because
building.
because they wanted for open range. They were unhappy with the way the federal government was governing range rights in the West.
Right.
That was their primary beef.
Yes.
They took over a federal installation owned by the Fish and Wildlife Service, administered by the Fish and Wildlife Service, owned by the Department of Interior.
Yeah, and they holed up in there for a while.
Days.
Yeah.
Pointed guns at local, state, and federal officers.
What happened to those guys?
They were acquitted on some of the charges. Acquitted.
Interesting. And by interesting, I mean bullshit.
They caused damage to that federal building,
Yeah.
tens of thousands of dollars.
Right.
They pointed guns at police officers.
Right. Right.
Some of them were killed because they pointed guns at police officers.
Yeah. Yeah, so let's just, as a quick brief aside on that, and what happened on January 6th is the
Completely different
is
thing.
the damage that we pay for. We pay for that.
That's
folks.
right.
We all pay for that.
And
And,
listen,
if you
we
watch the news today and you see all of the state capitol buildings being shored up with plywood and
Everything
we're paying
else.
for all that.
Right.
We're paying
Just
for all
2
that.
weeks ago, a little bit over 2 weeks ago, the Oregon state capitol was overrun by armed protesters who were protesting COVID regulations. While the Oregon state government was inside trying to debate those very regulations,
Right.
they were disturbed by protesters, whatever you want to call them, who were trying to overthrow that democratic process of Oregon politicians sitting down to decide how are we going to handle this
Right.
COVID.
What about Michigan? What about the kidnapping of the governor?
Plot to
Plot.
kidnap the
Plot to
governor.
kidnap the governor. Yeah,
There's a difference.
there's a big difference.
There's a big difference.
Yeah.
We haven't even scratched the surface.
We haven't even named one politician's name
None.
in this entire, and it's really irrelevant, other than the person that incited the insurrection. That
If
person.
we go by what we're doing, which is breaking it down into its fundamental terms,
Take the emotion out.
person
Yep.
who stirred that up, the person who fomented it, that's the
Yes.
legal term.
Yes.
That's the rhetorical term, the science of language, so to speak, the linguistics of it. I'm sorry, I'm
Yeah.
slurring a little bit. I've had a couple of beers. The people that fomented that. Now let's talk about that. Let's break that down for a little bit. I think all of us agree that the Confederates fought against our nation. They established their own government, their own constitution.
Right.
They had what would later become what is considered the Declaration of Independence for the Confederacy.
Yeah, they did articles of secession or
Yes.
Yeah.
And there was some other writing that went along with that. So there it is, writing. They had politicians, they had diplomats that went out and argued for the Confederate cause. They wrote about it. They talked about it. They traveled to other countries and talked about it. They tried to create allies
Yeah, they were trying
towards
to
their cause.
whip up support.
They whipped up support from within their states and abroad in order to overthrow the U.S. federal government. How is that any different? Ask yourself, and I don't care what part of the political spectrum you belong to, ask yourself that if a congressman, if a senator, if a president, if a state representative from your state starts making speeches, writing, taking action that lead to tens of thousands of people going and disturbing a constitutionally established process. How is that any different than what the Confederates did?
I thought you were still talking about the Confederates. That's how alike it is.
What argument are you going to make that I can say whatever I want, and just because those people or that group of people took action to overthrow the United States of America, I'm not responsible for that? Look at the symbols that they are using. And we've talked about this on this show.
Right.
The Gadsden flag.
And you mentioned two flags to me today that I wasn't...
The Appeal to Heaven flag.
Yeah.
You are
talking in
going
Latin
to
and I didn't get it,
see...
yeah.
You are going to see a Pennsylvania politician using the Appeal to Heaven flag as part of the rhetoric and the argument that he is making in order to support this insurrection and sedition. He is using revolutionary symbols and icons in order to make that argument. The battle flag of the Confederacy is a symbol. It's an icon of insurrection and sedition that showed up on our Capitol for the first time in United States history.
There's no doubt as to the symbolism of the Confederate
of what
flag.
that stands for.
Zero.
Unequivocal.
Zero.
And even if you want to get away from, oh, well, that's just Southern heritage, read the beginnings of the Gadsden flag, the Appeal to Heaven flag.
So the Appeal to Heaven flag is the pine tree.
It's the pine tree on a white field with the words Appeal to Heaven in a semicircular fashion across the top. Did I explain that to you in a dictionary definition well enough?
Yes. Used during the American Revolution. Flag featuring a pine tree with the motto "An appeal to God," or more usually "An appeal to heaven," was originally used by a squadron of 6 cruisers commissioned under George Washington's authority as Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army in October 1775. It was also used by Massachusetts State Navy vessels.
Let's go back. Let's go back to its original use. It was used by 6 Navy ships to signify George Washington, who was the leader of the American Revolution. And now we have Pennsylvania politicians that are using that flag in order to represent their movement. Let's talk a little bit deeper about what we saw on January 6, 2021. The American flag was taken down from the U.S. Capitol, and a flag of one man was put up in its place.
Yeah.
And now the people that support that one man are using historic icons and symbols of revolution that were authorized by the person that became our first president of the United States. You think, please, I challenge you to a debate on that symbolism.
Right.
One man, the flag of one man was flown, and the people that are supporting him are flying a symbol that was authorized by our first president.
Right.
If you can't
You're not offended by that.
If you can't see the direct link there, please come sit down with me. I'll show you the history books. I'll show you the pictures. We'll talk about it.
So the history of flags and how they get appropriated, we started talking about with the Gadsden flag.
I'm fired up. I'm fired up, baby.
I couldn't tell, Matt. But it's important. It's important to know, and that pisses me off. It really angers me that a flag can be appropriated like that.
Hijacked.
the Gadsden flag, which it started as a uniting
Join or die.
Join. We all got to join together, or we're going to die as a nation. That's the original meaning of the Gadsden flag. And then it morphed into the "Don't Tread on Me." But the pine tree flag, I was not aware of that history. But
listen, unless you're deep into politics the way that I am, you might not even know what I'm talking about. And some people who do follow politics the way that I do, and I don't even want to mention a man's name because we've made a commitment not to do that on this show. People who are curious, you will find it for yourself. My point in all of this is to inspire people to learn about the history of this nation and take those symbols back to where they belong.
Right.
They do not belong to insurrectionists, with the exception of the Confederate stars and bars. That is an insurrectionist,
it's inherently
seditious
insurrectionist,
flag. It is not an American flag.
No.
It's a flag that represents the Confederate States of America. That was not the United States of America.
Right.
Clear.
Yeah. Yeah.
We have to get back to knowing our history, knowing what it truly stands for and what it's become. It just like we started this conversation. Science evolves, history evolves, political science evolves. If we are not careful, we can lose it in a day. What's Levi want to talk about?
He was going to start making dinner, but this part of the kitchen is visible. Sorry, folks. Pardon the interruption. Just give us a couple minutes. We're deep into it.
We're at 6:02.
Yeah. But we're having some good conversations. We're talking about definitions. We're talking about
We're
very
breaking
broad
it down.
definitions. We're not pointing fingers. We're not making accusations. We're not naming names. We are talking about the definitions of criminal activity, federal criminal activity,
political activity,
the
nature of arguments,
yes,
the true nature
yeah.
of argument
and I think
rhetoric.
Really that's what's missing. If you watch talk shows on the news, if you watch on either side, right? There's a lot of name calling and finger pointing, and I think when you boil it down like we are here, Matt, without naming names, we're just talking about acts that happened and things that people could be charged with.
Right.
Very, very simply.
Plain and
I think
simple.
You wouldn't even know what side we're on by this conversation because we're just talking about definitions.
I don't
care.
care.
You know what side we're on, but I'm just saying.
And I would say this: I think the majority of our viewership feels the same way that we do.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
I just wanted to document and immortalize. Is that the right word?
Yeah.
Some of my thoughts and feelings on this.
Right.
Because it's important to me.
Right.
And I don't care. I do not care. I will not be affected if somebody doesn't want to do business with me because of my position on any of this. You weren't doing business with me to begin with if you have an opposite opinion or interpretation of what I said on this show.
There has been some corporate fallout from this. There have been some big supporters, Republican Party supporters that have big corporations that have withdrawn their support.
At least temporarily.
Exactly. So that's where it tends to hurt people.
You got to hit them in the pocketbook,
right? So yes, we have some comments here. People are appreciative of the history.
Do that.
You know, I think somebody asked the other day, Matt, about online classes, and you had offered a resource for some online classes that you had taken.
Yeah,
somebody was looking for
I
civics.
started one, and I thought it was going to be easy, and it wasn't easy.
Well, you
Great
weren't going
Courses.
for your masters
the
or
great,
anything, right?
The Great Courses is a channel that if you have Roku, I have a Roku TV.
Okay, yeah, we don't have that.
And then I have a
Yes.
Roku stick for
Right.
my other TV.
Yep.
If you have Roku, the Great Courses is one of the channels that comes on your Roku TV or your Roku stick. You can sign up for free classes through through the Great Courses.
Cool.
They had one on Native American history.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you're so inclined, they also have subscription-based classes that you have to pay for.
Right.
But they do have a pretty good inventory of free stuff.
Yeah, cool.
Why don't you give some shout-outs? Because I did see people coming in,
Yes,
and
yes.
I apologize to anybody who was looking for their personal shout-out.
Nope,
I
that's
tried
okay.
to get
We,
some of that stuff out on the sly.
We said hello.
I'm gonna be
we want
right
to also make the
back.
disclaimer that we copied the stream from last week, so we are not live at Steel River.
I think
we'll
I took
change
that out.
I still see it on my screen. I didn't
All
want
right.
to mess with it.
After
but
the show,
we'll
I'm
make
gonna
sure
take
that's
that down.
fixed. Rachel McKay chimed in and said yes, the sergeant at arms did resign. So she shared in the comments there. She shared a Reuters article to let us know that the sergeant at arms of the Senate did resign. So you can read about that. Thanks for tuning in, Jennifer DiCarlo. And Rachel, thank you for that comment. Lisa Vanny, sorry you had to hop off, but thanks for watching. Bonnie Kerr, thank you. Thanks for tuning in. And Marissa Swiderski, thank you. Some folks, Deborah Staley Slater, saying that, yes, the people are arguing that the voting process changed halfway through the election cycle. I think that was one of the big arguments in Pennsylvania specifically, is that the rules were being kind of overlooked because of COVID, specifically with mail-in ballots and changing the rules kind of halfway through the process as far as how those votes were counted. Thanks for tuning in, Pat Solonik and Kelly Wolfel, nice to see you. And Bill Brogley, thank you. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Oh, and there was an update there about the Bundy ranchers. They were pardoned in 2018. That makes me angry. Yeah. So, and thanks for tuning in. Hey, Paul, I'll see you tomorrow night at Book Club. So we would encourage people to do an online course. You might be able to audit a course. You can go online, maybe at Monco. Maybe there's a history course that you can audit, or there's a lot of different study courses that you can take. So if you're looking for something to wrap up the next couple of months of pandemic, something to
Do it.
educate yourself, brush up. I'm sure I learned all of this in high school, but I certainly could use a brush up.
Some of the broader concepts are definitely taught in American history, state history, civics classes. Some of the things that we got into are bordering on college level and maybe even master level
Yeah, but
class.
there's theory and things like that. There's it's one thing to study events, but to look at
The thoughts and actions that went behind them.
right, and how the collective conscious of the country changes through different times.
That's right.
Right?
And we can gain a deeper understanding of those times by the study of history. But I think what I wanted to try to document now, at least if it was even just in some kind of digital form, was what, selfishly, I'm experiencing now. To some extent, what happened last week on Wednesday was a culmination for me of tens of years of study, maybe as much as half of my life.
Mm-hmm.
I'm 46 years old, more than half of my life. I started studying history at a college level when I was 18. I'm now 36.
You're 46.
Yeah, 46. I did the half thing.
Right.
My brain works on half math.
That
So
crazy new math.
I wanted to. I'm sorry, Amy.
Why are you apologizing to me?
No, because I keep cutting you off.
You got a lot of good stuff to say. People like to hear it. I just think it's important to have this information of basic definitions textbook definitions and also political definitions, to have those definitions, and to try to, when we talk to people that may have different opinions on what happened last week, and different opinions on what's happening in the country right now, to be armed with information, not rhetoric, not opinions, but information. And what we've talked about here are simple definitions and how those definitions apply to
what we saw,
actions that happened.
What I saw.
It's very simple.
What I saw as an expert in some of this stuff, and I don't want to. I'm not trying to blow my own horn. I am an expert in some of these matters.
Right.
I can have a discussion with somebody who has a PhD in any of these areas easily.
I can discuss whether you should wear pleated pants or flat front, and Bill Brugley, the answer is always flat front.
Flat front.
That's
Nobody wears pleats anymore. That's ridiculous. The 80s are over. I'm a churl. I'm absolute Neanderthal when it comes to fashion, but I know you can't wear pleated pants.
Speaking of which, sorry,
cut them off.
A little levity to the situation.
Cut those pleated pants off and come fishing with me. That's all they're good for anymore.
When I saw the cut off pleated pant shorts, I was like, that's even worse than pants. But speaking of fashion,
we did see. Yeah, I don't know.
$20. We have literally like 5 hats left, folks.
We did talk about some of the topics that were covered by the former governor of California. We're trying not to, at least Amy and I on this episode are trying not to name names.
Yeah, we're just talking about definitions and the boiled down basics of what we're facing.
Seeing and experiencing.
Right? And hopefully, if you are in a position where you feel like you need to have a debate with somebody that's on the other side, that you can look up some of the definitions and study them and understand what they mean, and understand the consequences of what these actions are.
Absolutely.
And just focus on that. Don't talk about the guy whose flag was flown. You don't even need to bring him or any other politician.
All you have to say is describe it as one.
Those are
it
different
was
conversations.
One man's flag. That flag has only one person's name on it.
Right. Yeah. There's a great line from In Cold Blood. Did you ever read the book or see the movie? Truman Capote wrote the book.
No.
And it was
he's not on my reading list.
Okay, it was a good movie. I think it's based on a true story. There's a fantastic line where spoiler alert, folks, if anyone's going to read it or watch it.
It's based on a murder.
Yeah. It's I think it takes place in Kansas. The convicted is walking up to the gallows. And he says to the hangman, they're having a conversation, and he says, who are you? Do you have a name? And the hangman says, "We the people." So,
I'll let that symbolism speak for itself.
Yeah, so it's time for we the people to start holding people accountable for the crimes.
What happened on the 6th is a minority opinion within this country. I'm not speaking about their ability to coalesce power. I'm not speaking about the capital that those people, and by capital I mean PAL, not OL, the financial resources.
Right.
The fiduciary capital that those people might have at their command. What I'm talking about is the fact that more people voted for the other side. They hold a minority opinion. They
Right.
do not reflect the opinions and beliefs of the majority of Americans.
And I think that's really
And we-
important to talk about because
Yeah.
they're the loudest, right? They're the loudest and the
We have to-
noisiest.
we
And
have to-
so it's easy to think that there's more of them than there are.
This is the time for people to take a stand or take a position. And if you want that position to be one of someone who's going to be open to pulling back someone from the other side or rescuing somebody from the other side, so be it. Let that be your stance.
Mm-hmm.
But please use some resources that are at your command
Yeah.
to formulate your opinion and ability to do that.
If you're watching this show, you have a lot of resources
A lot.
available to you.
We've made them known.
Yeah.
I will say this, and it's the very last of the deep thought that I'm gonna make.
Deep
Then we
Thoughts
could
by Jack Handy.
give some more shout outs or whatever else. Pat, I don't agree with you. I mean, I agree with you. It's from what we talked about. I'm talking to my son now. It's wrong. It's not factual. Their entire movement on January 6, 2021 was built on lies. And it was fomented and forwarded and stirred up by people who are perpetuating those lies.
And there were a lot of court cases,
Over 60.
including the Supreme Court of the United States of America, who decided that all of those cases were not valid.
Read the opinion that occurred here in our circuit that was issued by a judge who was part of a conservative think tank called the Federalist
Mm-hmm.
Society. That's all I'm going to say.
All right, the Federalist Society.
Read the opinion that was put out on this voter fraud stuff right here in Pennsylvania from a federal judge
From a
who's a
judge.
member of the Federalist Society.
Right.
Read up on the Federalist Society.
Yeah.
Tell me if you don't think
Yeah.
that
So,
man's not a conservative.
turn off the TV,
Read.
do some research.
Yep.
We're not suggesting that you can't be angry or that you can't try to,
I'm angry.
I mean, but be informed in as objective a way as you can, right? Be objective about the
objective.
information that
Try
you're
to
seeking
be.
out.
The last point that I wanted to make, and I'm glad that I got a chance to address my son, and I would say the same thing to all three of my sons. I will say the same thing, say things to all three of my sons. The last thing that I want to make is if you see yourself having a role of one of trying to pull back friends, family members from this other side or this wrong way of thinking, then do that. I'm here and now telling you that I no longer see that as my role. It's not the role that I'm trying to fulfill.
Right.
The role that I'm trying to fulfill is to defend the position that I have taken, which I think is backed by history and fact. And I'm not going to waver from that.
Right.
And if I have to have a uncomfortable conversation with somebody, I'm prepared to do that.
Have the uncomfortable conversation.
If I am put into a position where I have to have physical confrontation with somebody, I am prepared to do that.
I hope it never comes to that.
I hope not either.
Yep.
I just want to make it clear. It's not my role anymore to bring somebody back from the other side. There are other people out in this world who are going to be far better and far better positioned to take that role.
Right.
I'm going to leave that to them.
Right.
In any organization, there are different roles that people have to play. My role is going to be one of defense, of supporting the position that I have taken, that millions of other Americans have taken. If what I have said here today offends you, so be it.
I do not think that we've said anything offensive. That's just me.
I think just the mere presence of a person like me saying what I'm saying can be found to be offensive by some factions within our society.
I don't think any of those people are watching the show.
I don't think so either.
Yeah.
I don't think so
Right.
either. But I'm documenting
Yep.
that.
Yep.
That's the last of my deep thought.
All right, folks.
Thanks for the beer, Amy.
Yeah, you're very welcome. I don't have any news. I did want to say happy birthday again to our friend Velva. Yeah, that was it. We're not going to mention any other news.
Now we really
But that's okay.
don't.
We'll lighten it up for Thursday.
We're gonna lighten it up for Thursday.
We think we're going to go on the road. We'll announce that
We're
once we
going
got
on the road.
details.
I don't want to name any businesses or anything
Yep.
on this episode.
We'll get that posted
Stay
up.
tuned to the advertising that we're going to do on Facebook. You can find Porchcast Pottstown at Matt Green at Glocker. Woo! You can find Porchcast Pottstown at Matt Green at Glocker Real Estate on Facebook. You can also find us on YouTube,
Yes.
Porchcast Pottstown.
We had a couple of
We
people
are
watching.
getting good subscribers
Yeah.
on Porchcast Pottstown.
Yeah,
Please
we,
continue
62
to
subscribers.
subscribe.
We're getting there. We're
It's
getting
up
there.
from the last time we talked
And
about
we
it.
had, I think we had a handful of people watching over on YouTube. So thank you, YouTubers, for tuning in.
Thank you, everyone.
Appreciate it. Hello to my friend Andrea, if she's watching. She watches on YouTube.
Nice.
Yes.
Remember, folks, that the episodes, this one, all the other ones, will live in posterity.
Yes.
On
Forever and ever, amen.
Matt Green at Glocker Real Estate and Porchcast Pottstown on YouTube. Thanks for tuning in.
Thanks for
bearing
watching. Thanks
with
for
us.
your comments, folks. And
Yeah.
thanks for just for the intelligent conversation.
Thanks for the support.
Yeah.
Thanks for the support. Really,
Yeah.
honestly, it means a lot to us. It means a lot to the community. It means a lot to your fellow watchers.
And if you want to be highly visible as a Porchtonian,
Get your hat.
we've got about 5
We're
minutes left, folks,
bringing
so-
you the merch.
and stickers and magnets. So
We'll talk about that more
Hit me
on
up.
future episodes.
Yep.
I am opening myself up to a conversation. If you would like to engage with me on the internet or in person for a reasonable and rational discussion, you know where to find me.
Yep. Same. If you want to know what to wear tomorrow, I can help you.
We'll make,
Flat
if
fronts,
nothing
Bill Burley,
else,
flat
you'll be
fronts.
fashionable and maybe functional at the same time.
Gotta have
You and I will have to talk about different fabrics, their fashionality and their functionality.
what to wear in the woods while you're hiking.
Yes.
I
while
went
you're
hiking the other day. I wore a dress.
Did
I
you?
hiked in a dress, yeah.
Was it comfortable? Were you
Super
cold?
comfortable. Yeah,
Now, did you have leggings or
I
something?
did.
on
I
you?
have leggings. I had boots. I went, just as a quick aside, it was a really hard hike. Like for me, it was really hard. So I had boots. I had high boots on, and I took my phone out of my backpack and I put
Right.
it in my boot because I was like, if I fall down and like break my leg, I'm not going to be able to get to my backpack. I want to be able to get to my phone really easily.
Yeah. Rescue, please.
Rescue. Yeah, because I was walking near a group, a family, and then they doubled back and they left. And I was
Right.
like, who's going to hear me if I scream? So I was really proud of myself. I went all the way to the apex, and then I went all the way down to the creek. So I was at the highest point in the park and the lowest point.
Right.
Did about 3.5 miles.
Good.
So anyway,
I need to get out. I
Hiking
need
in a
more
dress.
exercise in my life.
yeah.
Gonna go fishing
Go
hopefully
fishing.
later in the
Let's
week.
do some salt and yaki.
Salt. Let's
Time
do
for
something.
that again. Let's do it.
All right, it's getting
All
on
right,
6:30.
folks. Thanks for watching.
I'm going
Thanks
to
for
tune
tuning in.
off. I'm not doing our regular outro.
Nope.
All I'm saying is thanks for tuning in. Stay heads up. Keep your wits about you.
Stay safe.
Do
in
not
all ways.
believe
Stay safe in
that
all ways.
the 6 was the end of this.
Nope. We're in this for a long time, folks.
Stay safe. Tune back in Thursday for our regular scheduled program.
All right. Let's talk soon.
Let's talk
We
soon.
are Porchcast.